All right, so I had a kind of goofy dream this morning, but it feels like it's on par for my family anyway. So I wrote it down. I was going to read it, and then there's more that I want to read that talks about yesterday and some things that I was making connections with. It's a little bit discombobulated, but I mean, if you watched any of my videos, that's how I am anyway. So I'm just going to read it anyway. Okay. So it says, this morning I had a dream where I was at a family thing, like I briefly popped in for last night, but don't think I wrote about. And I don't remember exactly what was going on, but something yellow was set on the table, and my grandmother, the first line of complacency, says, yellow makes me think of Sarah. I don't like yellow. In the dream, all the sisters gasped like it was news they'd never known before, and I just put my middle finger up and put it real close to her face and smacked my arm so it kind of flipped her on the nose as I said something like, that's not new. And then I woke up. It's kind of my little silly dream. So yesterday what happened was, okay, I'm reading. Focus. Yesterday, I was doing a video at my brother's and realized it was 5:51, and I should look that number up now that I'm thinking about it, which I did. My mom said that my aunt had picked up pizza and it was dinner time and I was hungry, so I went over to my grandma's house, which is where the pizza was. I had a couple pieces of pizza, breadstick, piece of cake. Mom had requested a Diet Coke when I was on my way, and since I wanted a root beer to go along with the pizza, I went ahead and stopped. My grandma was all excited that I was there and trying to engage with me. She had pictures that my aunt had brought over of baby grandpa and tried to show me, and I just looked at the one on top and said, yep, and left it at that. And I honestly can't stand looking at pictures of the baby because that is all I see is that child is my grandfather reincarnated. I cannot, nothing can convince me otherwise. Okay. I made a comment later about I guess I should go to the zoo tomorrow if I'm going to go, as today is the last day of our zoo membership. And my grandma says, if you don't go to the zoo, I need to go to Aldi. You could take me there. I didn't say anything, but everything in me was like swords up and defensive, and I was like, no, 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 in my head on repeat. Mom said she's going to be going to Greenfield for an appointment either today or tomorrow, and she could take her. Um, kind of swooping in to play the hero and deflect from the fact that I didn't want to be there, which everyone knew already, or I didn't want to go. And then my grandmother goes on and on about, no, whoever takes me, I don't want them going out of their way for me. And I was just thinking, yeah, you do, or you wouldn't have asked me, with the expectation that I just go along willingly for no other reason than I came over for food and you're hoping I'm back. So I realized that's why so much involves food in this family. It's not like it's like being voluntold to do something you don't want to do, and the food is to numb you to the fact that you don't want to do it, but you came over for the communion of food and are thus somehow obligated to do what's asked even if you don't want to. Food, as with any addiction, is simply a means to numb you to the dissonance in your system about not wanting to do something but feeling otherwise obligated to do it. It's a means of dividing that feeling out to mask it, but then it takes more of the substance to feel less bad about doing the things that aren't aligned with what your soul desires. The more you partake, the more it takes to ease the dissonance, and the more you engage with the substance to numb the feeling of discomfort through the dissonance. So yeah, that's kind of... I've been pondering a lot that whole piece because, that's a big... I've talked about how, it's always this thing to have the Sunday night get together. And it's always about, yes, visiting with the family and, keeping up the illusion of closeness, but also the food. And my mom and her sisters and my grandma would never talk to each other beforehand. So you'd go and there'd be like 4 or 5 desserts for this group of people, right? And it's usually, okay, when my grandfather was alive, there was him and my grandma, and then my mom, my dad, me frequently. My brother and his family were kind of hit and miss, or more so hit and miss. My mom's middle sister and her husband, her daughter and her husband and the baby occasionally pop in, usually just for birthdays and stuff. And then otherwise, my mom's youngest sister and her husband and her son. And now that her daughter's back home, I don't know how much she goes, but it's probably more than I do now. But anyway, it's like they will never coordinate unless there's going to be dinner. Then they might coordinate on some things, but there's still going to be way too much, and most of it's going to end up getting thrown away. You know what doesn't get eaten there? Then, of course, everybody's feeling bad because there's all this leftover dessert. So then it's getting sent to, you know, everybody's splitting it up and taking it home. And, you know, somebody in the any given house might eat it the next day, or it might just sit there and eventually go in the trash anyway, right? But nobody ever wants to coordinate, so there's less wasted. And I think it's pretty... Sorry. I had my pen tucked in the side of my shorts, and I dropped it on the floor and scared the shit out of the hound, and she is not impressed. And this one's on alert now, too. Okay, anyway, so I looked up a 555, and the Google overview says... or AI overview says, signifies significant life changes and spiritual awakenings. It suggests you're about to experience major shifts in your life and encourages you to embrace these changes with optimism and trust. I looked up this other thing. It said, from astrology.com, says, 5 resonates with personal freedom, making positive life choices and changes, progress, versatility, adaptability, and resourcefulness. 1 signifies new beginnings, ambitions, leadership, pursuing goals and desires, intuition and instinct. Hence, 551 brings a message of positive changes in your life that will lead to progress and success. A powerful manifestation number. Hey, dude. Hey, thanks. Urging you to start manifesting your goals and desires ASAP. Believe in yourself and your abilities to manifest your deep desires. Set clear intentions and visualize what you want to achieve in life. Will you stop? I don't need you that close. My biggest hang up with these dogs. They're very sweet. But if you move or do anything, they have to be like right here. And like I've shown India many times where she just like keeps doing this crap. That drives me nuts. But yeah. No, yeah, that's not relevant. I was like, there was something else I thought I was maybe potentially going to read. I've been, God, okay. I found this little article on my phone, and I ran into the other room to grab my pen to write down the little blurb that it said about Cancer zodiac, because it was relevant, and because I like journaling about random weird things, especially that are relevant, right? When I got the pen, and then got back to when I got my pen, it was in the other room, and I looked at the stove on my way back, and it was 3:33, and then as I, woke my phone back up, if you will, it had 3:33, and then also the date on it, so on the 30th, so there it was, and my phone was at 1 hour and 23 minutes to charge. But I just thought that was a funny little, or funny, not funny, haha, but a fun little blip that I decided to include just there. Anyway, the article I wrote down, or the blurb I wrote from, is called 4 Zodiacs Beginning a New Chapter of Rebirth in These Last Days of June. It was written on 6/28 by Nicole Stawiarski. Okay, the other 3 are Pisces, Gemini, and Capricorn. Cancer kind of made me chuckle because she says, your rebirth saga is on par with Greek mythology. Your life takes these crazy turns that don't really match the experiences of anyone you know, but you always find a way to make it fit into your greater life story. Athena was born when Hephaestus split open Zeus's skull with an axe to stop his migraine. Aphrodite was born from Uranus' castrated genitals and sea foam. Your journey to rebirth may contain details. She might have meant to have may not include, but I don't know, but it made me chuckle anyway. It says your journey to rebirth may contain details just as shocking or bizarre, but it's not about what led you to this moment, but what you do after. Be the god or goddess you were always meant to be. Step into your armor and your power and be the hero of your own wildest adventures. Life can be as magical and mysterious as our favorite myths. We just have to be willing to go along for the ride. So, yeah. I don't know. I feel like everything's kind of been pointing to the idea that things are getting ready to happen. And I've been, I guess, feeling kind of antsy for... I hate that. My mom sent me a message asking if my dad had any luck with his phone. Phone drama. House drama. 11:11. My parents have lost my father's wallet and his phone. And my mom wanted me to check to see if the phone was in the car from a couple nights ago. And it's like, I know it's not, because I remember walking out the door, going out into the garage to walk to the car and thinking I was glad that I had an excuse to leave because he had Trump loving bullshit on the phone playing, and I was not interested in hearing that. And usually if I say anything, he has a meltdown. So the other day when I said anything, and it's not... Okay, the other day he was watching something where the dipshit was going on and on about the lunatics. And of course, since that's, his means of communicating anything, is just mocking everybody, which therefore feels appropriate to mock him in response. My dad had this thing on and he's talking about, all these lunatics, and I said, spoken by the head lunatic himself. And my dad was pissed. And he just takes his phone, it's slow motion bringing it up, and then trying to fling it down on the table as hard as he can. And honestly, I was surprised he didn't crack the screen, but he didn't. But anyway, he's always watching that kind of bullshit, right? So I don't have any problem making smart-ass remarks when that's the stuff he's consuming nonstop. Because he's watching all this, hate rhetoric, and then that's what he's putting back out into the world, right? So he consumes it all, and it has nowhere to go, because of course I've got a whole lot of energetic boundaries because I don't want their icky energy contaminating me anymore. So yeah, I've talked a lot about how as I've started to set boundaries, I'm less influenced by the things they say or do, and I've realized that there's a certain amount of it that my brother and I both, it's like we were absorbing it to, for this transmutation thing, right? So we absorb the density in the environment, and then it's on us to find a way to release it or transmute it into something lighter. So our family has always benefited from the fact that we just absorb it. And it took us both to some really dark places, most of which I've talked about I've sorted through on my space here, trying to navigate all of that stuff. And, as we both set boundaries and we're not getting pulled into their bullshit because, we don't want it anymore. Never really wanted it, just thought we had to take it on because, we weren't taught that boundaries were a thing you were even allowed to do, right? So, I've talked about how we were brought up specifically not to have lives but to contribute to the toxic family existence, right? So they want to just all be miserable, but then because of like the energetic cords, suck the life out of the younger generations and then become the younger generation's burden as, you know, they had to take on the burden for their parents and grandparents and all that stuff. You know, we've been expected to just fall into that role, and we don't. Well, we got pulled into it for a long time. And then, you know, as I've talked about, discovering that I was even, you know, setting boundaries was even a thing I could do, and started doing that, it really shifted the dynamic. And it's like they, especially my parents and grandparents, it's like the meanness became much more obvious, you know. So of course they consume all this hateful shit on TV and all that, and then, you know, they go around and, you know, like, okay, the last time I went to the hospital when my grandfather was there, my mom pulls up something on social media with a heavier celebrity, you know, who's into the body positivity stuff, and with the outfit that she had on, my mom comments, she looks at it and says, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And of course, you know, she and my grandmother are all right there with it. And I just, you know, she shows me and I just like look at her and it's like, judgy much? You know, and she didn't appreciate that, calling out that part of it. And, you know, my my aunt, the youngest sister, was just like, but it's like, that's the kind of thing. Like I've talked a lot, like she always wants to go to the mean thing to say. You know, I'll go back to that point of when I was walking down the hall when I was in high school and she called me in her room just to say, you're a very pretty girl, but you don't act like it. It's like, I was literally minding my own business, just going into my room. Why did you have to speak to me at all? You know, but then of course, at that point, I was just like, what the fuck? But that's the kind of stuff that I was always receiving from them, right? So, yeah. So it's like, whatever mean things they have that they can say or do, they find a way to say or do them rather than, you know, not, rather than trying to be nice or not be a shitty human. You know, my grandparents, my parents all have a really hard time with that. You know, my grandfather no longer since he's gone, but I mean, unless he has in fact come back in this baby, which I am confident that he did, and, you know, that baby's birth chart suggests that he's got some karma to make up for this time around. So, especially being in this family. Like my grandma showed me that she had a stack of pictures that my aunt had printed off and brought over for her, and she wanted me to look at them, and I want nothing to do with that baby. And you know, I've talked about that a lot too. It's like, okay, so my cousin was pregnant when my grandfather was dying. After my grandfather died, okay, that was also, you know, when I had that conversation with my mom where I sat down with her and was like, at some point it has to be okay for this man to die. And what I said to her was, besides, Randa's pregnant, who's to say he's not going to come back right away anyway? And honestly, I feel like that's a big part of what made it okay for her to finally allow him to go. You know, because everybody was just supposed to be going in on how terrible this was, that my grandfather was dying. It's like, God, how old was he even? 85, I think, when he died. It's like, the man's fucking 85. Most people don't get to live to that. And he hasn't been grateful for it. Like, the whole time, like, okay, at least 33 years of my life was spent being preoccupied with worrying about that man's death. And, you know, I've talked about back in August when he broke his femur and had to have surgery and all that stuff. You know, of course, my aunt was talking about the breaks later in life, it's almost always an eventual death sentence. But it's like, he's 85. It's like most people don't get this long, and he hasn't been grateful for it. He's wasted the entire time obsessing over dying, and brought everybody else into his drama, and not allowed anyone else to live either. It's like, that's not good. So in August, after he broke himself and all that, I did take my grandma and my aunt to the hospital on a daily basis while he was in the first hospital. When he went to the rehab place, it was in Greenwood. There's some back roads that my family was okay with driving, so it was less. And my mom wasn't living at the rehab hospital with him. She was living at the hospital with him every single time. The rehab hospital, they didn't really want people staying there the whole time like that. So she didn't. The first night, my aunt stayed over there with him. The second night, when he was at the rehab hospital, he was trying to figure out who was going to stay all night with him. And my uncle was like, do you need a babysitter? And that was the only thing that made it okay for everybody else to go home and not live there with him. But if he was at the hospital, my mom was living there every single time. And criticizing the fact that my grandma had some days she didn't want to go. So, which, there again, she was 83 at that point. So it's like, it's okay for this woman to be tired and to not want to go and do this every single time. And of course, the times that she wouldn't go, then it would be a big deal. My mom and my grandpa would just go back and forth with, well, if this was her, I would have been there. And my mom throwing in with, I know you would have, and blah, 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 all this stuff like he's some kind of fucking hero or whatever. But he also would have been antagonizing her because that was something that he always did. Anyway, I digress. Backtrack. The point of that spiel was once he got to the rehab hospital, I've talked many times about the morning I woke up and, I was kind of having this conversation with him in my head, and I was like, I have wasted 33 years of my life mourning your death, and you're not dead yet. I will not mourn any longer. And I didn't. Even something like, I cried a little bit at the funeral, but it wasn't because I was sad that he was gone, even. I was more frustrated with the fact that I seemed to have like this specific experience of him that nobody else had any understanding of. And it's like, I was just kind of by myself. It's like, and it goes back to that scapegoat point. We've talked about that many times, the family scapegoat. And, every single time he got the opportunity to find something about me that was different and stood out and was a problem for his illusion, he would try to tear me down for it, right? So, okay, I had 2 tortoiseshell colored cats. So there were a whole lot of black and orange and a little bit of white. And he couldn't stand that. Now, when I was little and we were going to my great-grandparents' farm all the time, they had only white cats with the occasional one rare I don't know the word. Exception, that one. Where, and it was, because, late 70s, early 80s, this is not ideal by any means. However, it's what happened. Since getting animals fixed, I don't think was nearly as common. My grandma, apparently, I've been told stories, she could only do it when they were wet. Like, brand new kittens, if they were, like, if they were still wet, she could, I mean, we're not going to say humanely euthanize them, but euthanize them one way or another. However, she did it. I don't want to really spend much time with those details. I know it happened. I was not the one that did it. And usually I was the one that thwarted it, because the first thing I always wanted to do was go to the place that I knew that the cats hid out when they were having kittens. And so a lot of times I would find them first. If I found them first, she couldn't do it. If she found them first, then she could, so long as they were still wet. Right? Brand spanking new. But it was always the ones that looked different, right? So the white ones were okay. And, the ones that were white with maybe a little gray spot on their head were okay too, because they were primarily white, and so a lot of times they, grew out of the gray spot. But still, that was the thing that my family did. And I always liked the ones with the spots. And the biggest thing is because they had all these white cats, I liked the ones that were different. I always have liked things that are unique, right? Which, there again, was part of the problem that my grandfather had with me, because, in my draw to the unique things, whether they be animals or whatever, I was going to be my own unique self as well. And, my great-grandparents didn't have a problem with who I was. They were just, they were thrilled to death with the grandkids having grandkids. So it's like it was never a problem with them. It was after my great-grandfather died and my grandparents moved back up, it's like, then I was a problem. Because I was the one that was in, stark opposition to my grandfather's illusion. And so since everybody else was in this energetic agreement to keep the illusion alive, I was a problem. And here again, I am the only one that has the colorful hair, although it does need work. I had this thought too. Okay, the last time I did my hair, it was like April. And my mom helps me with it, of course, because it takes a lot of work, and it's really hard to see the colors when I'm doing multiples in there. I have tweaked them after the fact, but doing it, especially when bleach is involved, I mean, I could probably handle the bleach myself. But what I said in April was I felt like it was going to be the last time that my mom helped me with it. I think I'm going to get it at least once more. But what had ended up happening was, I said that. It's just this weird feeling that I had. But then she ended up breaking her wrist, so she couldn't do it for a while. And now she's at a point where it's like her wrist is still healing, but she's able to use it enough that she said she's pretty sure it wouldn't be a problem. So we're probably going to fix this, hopefully tonight, because it's a hot mess. And I have tweaked the bangs multiple times, and they are back to, I might have to bleach these ends again because, she she didn't quite get them the last time. But somehow, not the last time, but like 2 or 3 times ago, there was a chunk that got missed. And it was like further down, but because other parts of it had been processed, she was concerned about going back. So it's like lighter than it was, but still doesn't hold the color as well as the bleached parts do. So anyway, hopefully that's on the agenda. But like, I'm the one that does the color. I was the first one, for generations to have tattoos. And, since then, there are 2 other cousins that have them, and my brother's talked about it recently, although he hasn't done it yet. Hasn't committed, but he has a bunch of ideas. Yeah. What are you doing? Yeah, so it's like I'm the one that starts the things, right? So, and the facial piercings, I'm the only one that's got those. So at least for our specific family line, right? So my grandfather was an only child, so he didn't have any nieces or nephews that way. My grandmother was the youngest of four, and all her sisters, her and her sisters, I think they all had 3 to 5. Yeah. But it's like for our line, the one that, I was the scapegoat for, because I was going to be the one that does the weird things. And here I am doing the weird things. Yeah. Anyway. Go back to that point of my grandfather. I got my lip ring in August 2023. It was after, the lip ring and the nose rings both. I got the eyebrow January 2020. And that one wasn't a problem. The other two seemed to be more of a problem, and I think partly because that one has more or less kind of hidden my hair to some extent, even when I didn't have bangs. I always had like a little chunk that tended to end up shorter than the rest, so kind of wannabe bangs when I didn't really have bangs. Anyway, so like that one was never a problem. But I got the lip ring and the nose rings after I turned 40, and it was the second factory job that I had just gotten, and my second or third paycheck there, and I was like, you know what? At one point in time, I think it was like 2010, I was having a conversation with a former coworker, and we were both into like the weird piercing. She had her tongue pierced, and I didn't have anything at the time, but I was into tattoos, so we were always talking about tattoos and piercings and all sorts of stuff. And I said, if you could get any piercing without it having any effect on your hireability with any job in the future, what would you have? And I have no idea what she said. I do not remember that at all. But even though I never thought about it before, I randomly said that I thought I'd get my lip pierced. So then when I turned 40, and, I've divorced my ex, divorced my whole belief system, and I'm still working on, trying to heal from the previous life baggage that I was still carrying. I got the lip ring and the nose rings, and when I said, I had this thought once, so clearly some part of me is inclined to want to do it, so why not do it? And I had only just started, I never thought I'd get my nose pierced, and then there was a girl that I was working with that had like a double hoop, and I really liked that. And it's like, all right, so like I said the thing about the lip ring once, and then I started, the nose ring started growing on me, and I was like, all right, why not? And so when I did it, I set the intention that I would never again work in another job that asked me to be less than 100% who I am. Right? So it's like it was kind of one of those, okay. Sorry. I keep shifting that every single time I rub my nose like that. And sometimes it comes out of that hole. But sometimes it's not where I want it to be right there. So anyway, it doesn't stay in the same place it is for the video very much. But the past several hours, for some reason, every time I hit my nose, I knock it one way or another. So I'm trying not to do that continuously, but I've done that a lot. Anyway, that's irrelevant. So that goes back to that intention setting thing, right? So it was something that I had randomly thought of. So why not? And as it was one of those things where I've always known that writing is a part of my path, even though I haven't done anything with it yet. This journaling all the time business is a big part of it because it's like lived out working through things, making connections. I spend some time clearing some things out in this space, and then I take it back to the journaling space. It's a whole back and forth. And I'm trying to keep that updated with like the connections that I'm making as I make them, because that's going to be relevant for putting the story together. So yeah. Anyway, intention setting. But how did I get there? Oh, my grandfather. So I got my lip ring and my nose ring in August 2023. And shortly after that was when I turned my love and career lives over to the universe to lead. And yeah, from that point on, if I was in the room as my grandfather and nobody else was in there, he couldn't just sit there quietly. So he would always, and of course I didn't have a hoop back then. If I had a hoop, he would have said something about that. But he would just randomly look at me and say, "You have a thing in your lip." And it was always the purpose of pointing out the thing that was different about me compared to everybody else, the thing that was unacceptable in his eyes, so I could be reminded that I wasn't part of his group, right? I wasn't acceptable for his family. And okay, so that's 2023. Before I started doing the YouTube thing, and was just starting to make the connections with some of the shit with the family. Like, okay, one of the start points was the realization that my grandfather had made me mourn his death for 33 years and he hadn't died. It's like, you keep wanting me to obsess over your death, and yet you don't have the audacity to keel over. So it's like, that's just a waste of my life, honestly, because I had to be preoccupied with this thing that kept not happening. But part of the reason it kept not happening was because, every time he was focusing on the things that made sure to remind me that I wasn't part of his family, it was a means of sucking the life out of me and taking it for himself, because he was all patting himself on the back anytime he could make me feel like shit about something, right? And yeah. And my mom played right in on it as well. So yeah. But once I started really making those kind of connections, and I was like, I want to do this. This isn't the life I want to lead. What the fuck is this? It's like, we wasted 33 years being wrapped up with him possibly dying. And, of course, he had cancer, like different types of cancer. Leukemia was the big one, multiple times. But not once did he ever express gratitude for the times it was in remission. It was, this is going to kill me. This shit's going to kill me. This shit's going to kill me. It's like, you're not going to live forever, dude, no matter how much you try. And his means of trying was suck the life out of everybody else to take it on for himself. So then when I started setting boundaries, and then started telling my brother what I was noticing as I was setting boundaries, and then started helping him do the things to set boundaries, and then he started noticing it, and it's like, this is fucked up. Right? So, yeah. Right, but like that was the thing. So it's like, zooming out further, the family that we grew up in is just a prime example of why the country's so fucked up, and chunks of the world at large, I think. But it's like all the little things that happened throughout my lifetime to chip away at my self-esteem and my ability to see myself as worthy of anything, which I've talked a lot about the religious conditioning that played into that as well. And yeah. So I feel like what's happening on the larger scale, especially like with the shit going on in the country even, is largely because people like me are pushing back and, starting to see through the bullshit. And it's like I have had to see it within this family framework, but then there are others that I don't feel like everyone has the same toxic family shit that I have, luckily. But, it was necessary for me to make sense of a lot of this stuff too. So, like the family system that I came from, me and my brother have talked about a lot. It was set up to chip away at us to feed the older toxic generations that don't want to heal. They just want to be stuck in their misery and make everybody else miserable, right? So, yeah. But then, those of us that are here for this transmuting thing are kicking back and, seeing how it's been destructive and how we've been harmed in it, and, pushing back on that side of things helps others to, start seeing more of the issue as well, right? Yeah. I just had a random thought. Hold on. Okay, so my thought was, I brought this book today, and there's a couple of things. I've talked about the herons a lot lately. The blackbirds haven't registered until I came across the thing in here, and it's like, wait, I have been seeing a lot of those, but they just weren't registering, but I stopped and read that a little bit ago. The thing that's been standing out today a lot, past couple of days, is dragonflies. I think I'm seeing those all over the place. So I'll go ahead and read it because why not? Okay, so please don't. I don't need help. Anyway, it says, Dragonfly, power of light. Keywords: transcendence, transformation, clarity, and sensitivity, and nature. The dragonfly has lived on the planet for more than 1 million years. An American Indian myth tells how the dragonfly was actually once a dragon, which eventually got too big for its boots and so was transformed into the dragonfly. Born in water as a nymph, the dragonfly dances in the realm of air as it matures, its wings reflecting and refracting light in a kaleidoscope of rainbow colors like a prism. It can fly at high speed, hover in one place, and even fly backwards. If you have dragonfly as your totem, you are deeply aware of how people, yourself included, can live under illusion, and you have the ability to part the veil and cast light on most situations. You may have suffered some deep childhood emotional trauma, emotionally intense in your early years. With dragonfly's assistance, you have learned to balance through mental clarity and control. A strong connection with nature is vital to you, so you must be outdoors in nature a part of every day. Often the totem animal of the gardener, dragonfly is a messenger from the realm of nature spirits, devas, fairies, and the little people, and you can work with these beings if your mind is open to them. Our allies in the world of nature, they can help bring back balance in the plant kingdom. A dragonfly appears when you need to see what is happening in a situation or relationship. Perhaps you are being too rational about an emotional matter, or maybe you are emotionally shut down or resisting change. It may be that you are busy with too many different things. Use your imagination just to shed light on the situation. Ask Dragonfly to help you with a new perspective. Let color come into your life. Try wearing colorful clothes for a change. Okay, the last part made me laugh before, and it made me laugh again because I tend to be colorful, right? So today I'm a little less colorful than I normally am. I love this shirt. And actually, it's a shirt and the earrings. Of course, these are Eklektik shelf again. Kind of my go-tos at the moment. I got really excited when I found these. These were the first ones that I got off of her. And I loved them. And then eventually, I bought a bunch of earrings. And then I realized that I hadn't found anywhere that had like vultures or hawks on them. And since I was seeing those all the time, I decided to ask her if she could make some, right? And she could. So I ended up buying a whole bunch more things off of her. So I have a huge collection of earrings that I've gotten from her, and like 20 more in my cart on Etsy because I love them. Anyway, I saw the crabs, right? And of course, well, I mean, it goes with all my cancer placements. But it triggered me to remember the book, and then I was thinking, I wonder if crab's in there. It is not. So now I'm going to have to look up the crab symbolism as well, and of course it's going to be connected to cancer and all this other stuff. But still, it just, when I saw the shirt while I was doing the video and the earrings, like, I should see if there's some kind of, further meaning, since it just grabbed my attention all at once. What more is there that I can get from this, right? So, yeah. But anyway, how did I get there now? God, I jump around so much. I don't know. I really just don't know. It's kind of funny that all that Dragonfly stuff, talking about the emotional trauma in early childhood and all that, it's like, oh, hey, I was just talking about that shit, right? So when I've been seeing them, it's triggered me to think about the Animal Apothecary deck, which also has a card that talks about the Dragonfly. And I don't remember what it says exactly, but I know there's one part that talks about, Dragonfly spends, so much time in the water as a nymph, and, it has no way of imagining the future version of itself. So the big thing is talking about just because you don't understand fully what you're here to do, basically don't discount yourself and and try to talk yourself out of being open to the possibilities of what you did come here to do, right? So you're here for more than you can possibly imagine, because you have no reason to imagine more. So like my entire life, it's like these little glimpses of things that feel pretty big and feel like, there's something more to them. But then at the same time, since my whole life has been very much not looking in agreement with the glimpses that I'm getting, it's kind of hard to lean fully into the idea of how big I do kind of feel like my purpose is supposed to be. Yeah. But it's like that's been a big part of the purpose of this channel, and healing, processing out the lower density shit so I can actually think about what I would want for a life of my choosing, and try to figure out how I can manifest more than what I've always had. And what I've always had has been shit, because, I keep getting fed this, these reminders about how, how I don't fit in the family, and how I'm somehow less than them because I didn't fit my grandfather's illusion, and I was the problem. And while I am more inclined to embrace that when I was little, it scared the shit out of me, right? So that's been a big part of the processing it out. Because otherwise it just sits in my system, and, everything. Okay, first off, I've been thinking a lot here lately about, the transmutation point. I talk a lot, and I think I mentioned it here today, that, like the lower density energy things, it's like they see my energy and latch on, like they're trying to suck the life out of me as much as possible, right? And of course, there was a time back when I made the brilliant decision to marry my ex, which I talked about that yesterday. How that was one of those downward spiral things. I going with the question of, I've always had that question that I wanted to understand how people get into toxic connections and then feel so stuck like they can't get out of them. The only way to understand is to live through it. So therefore, I had to go through that, everything that got me into that situation so I could figure out how I got into that situation and then try to clear it out to make room for better, right? Right. So, okay, when I allowed myself to continue the connection with the toxic ex, after I've talked about the first date we had, my impression of him was, damn, he talks a lot. And that wasn't in a good way. That was just an acknowledgement of the fact that he talked a whole lot. And it was like, he didn't give a shit about anything that I might possibly have to offer the conversation. I was just expected to listen and, there again, feed into his bullshit, right? So, that links directly to my grandfather, for that matter, and my father. And it's kind of funny because the grandfather and father are only they're only connected through my mother, in marriage. So, my mom's dad and then my dad, who entered into this agreement of sorts with my grandfather and my mother, just locking into, it was just the whole patriarchal structures, right? That I've talked a lot the past couple days about them latching on because of the energetic cords, and sucking the life that way. You enter into the agreement. Okay, when you have a contract, it makes it that much stronger, the cords, right? So everyone you connect with, it could just be as simple as passing them on the street. Somehow you can establish cords with these connections, right? Anyway, so when, I was of the mindset that I didn't know myself anymore, but I knew I liked to help people, and that was all I could figure as far as the connection with the dude I'd go on to marry was, he was obviously somebody that needed a lot of help. It's like, very, very bad reason to get into that kind of connection with somebody. But all the same, the things that led up to that, it was like, I talked yesterday about the downward spiral that I was on that got me there, and, continued, right? It's like, I think the breakup in 2011 with the dude I thought I was going to marry was a big trigger point because, of course, since I had been so convinced that he was the one I was going to marry, that was the only reason we had any kind of sexual connection at all, right? So because we had entered into this connection, but then also at a time we were having a deep conversation, there was a part of myself that I held back rather than just being completely vulnerable and opening up about it. Because of that thing started growing, right? It wasn't that it got any bigger for having existed at all. It was the fact that because I had chose not to mention it to him when it was something that was very important to me, it was a means of feeling and fueling that worthiness wound, right? So I figured if I opened up about this one specific detail, then, I knew when we were having the conversation that wouldn't have made him change his mind about me. What it did do when I couldn't own up to it was it made me change my mind about me. So, right, the thing that was so painful and I didn't want to look at it or own up to it just grew, right? And then when we enter into the sexual connection, because the worthiness wound was, it was increasing in a way. I felt less worthy, because I didn't allow myself to be open enough with him. The vulnerability piece, since I did not allow myself to be vulnerable fully and withheld a part of myself, that part that I was afraid to talk to him about. And it wasn't because I felt like he was going to reject me or anything. It was literally just I couldn't bring myself to talk about it. And so all that did was grow. And then anytime something came up where I had another opportunity, then it's like sex became a thing to run from that, right? So then it ended up with this big rift where, by the time we ended up breaking up, it's like he didn't know who I was and I didn't know who I was, because the fear of talking about the thing made it so that worthiness wound just kept growing, right? So then when we broke up, and then I had to face this, I had thought I was going to marry him, so I had allowed myself to get involved in this, the sexual aspect of the relationship, and then it became something to hide from or hide behind. That was like different means of chipping away at my self-worth. So then when we, it comes around and we break up, because there's nothing else to do once he didn't really know who I was, and I was starting to move from a place of fear more than anything, and then fear of being rejected if it came out at any point later, even though like when I when I got the sense that it was safe to mention it and I should mention it, it was me that had a problem with me, right? So then it was the me having a problem with me just kept growing and chipping away at my self-worth and my value. So so when that connection ends, and now I have to face the fact that I entered into this part of the connection that, my going back to that Christian upbringing, the conditioning bullshit, because the whole purity culture thing within the Christian church, that just made me feel that much worse. And of course, going back to that point of like my family always made me feel like damaged goods anyway, right? So I had no value because my cousin tried to enlighten me and everybody assumed that this thing had happened that hadn't actually happened, but because because he got some information and, he decided to try to enlighten me, and everything was going wrong for me because it was after my great grandfather died. I started at a new school, which, we all started in a new school at that point because the elementary had been part of the high school, and then, they built another elementary and we got moved to that one. So a bunch of us were starting over in a new school, right? But that was another piece. But then my dog that had been like my number one protector since I was a year old had to be put down, right? So it was like all these little things, and then my cousin comes in and wants to enlighten me, and it's like everything else is going to shit and I don't know anything better, and okay, so it's like, yeah. But rather than finding out what actually happened, which wasn't what my cousin said, at best it was more complicated version of kids playing doctor, I guess. But still, the point that it was even a thing that happened at all was because my family, thought that the means of keeping people in line was to neglect teaching anything, right? So like, okay, my sex education from my family was when I was 16, my mom gave me a pamphlet that talked, or it had a picture of frogs mating. It was very, like, I wish I would have hung on to that shit, honestly. I wrote about it in undergrad because I had like a women's studies class that I took, and we were talking about like the piece where women weren't supposed to have any kind of sex education, right? And that's very frowned on. And of course, my family just pushed the prudish side of things and lack of information. So then when my cousin comes up with this thing, I was 8, and he tries to enlighten me. It's like, nobody's told me any different. I don't know what the hell anybody's talking about, or what he's talking about. But then, like what I remember was, and this haunted me for the longest time, he was saying what the thing was and, touching me or whatever. And my response was, that's it. It's like, there is something wrong with this information that I've been given here. But everybody, okay, there were other kids in the room because my mom was babysitting, and 8-year-olds hide under blankets and think that's good enough. Discovered it was not good enough, on that privacy end. But then, there were the 2 kids that would go on to be 2 of my biggest bullies from the older generation. They were ahead of us in school. Okay. So I had a TV in my room when I was little, and, we had the Nintendo in there, and we all would go back in there and we're playing video games all the time. But since only a couple people could play at a time, right? So the one guy that would go, he was the worst of the worst, and was like, honestly, that is just like straight my grandfather. Everything about him was toxic and icky, and disliked me, and I disliked him. But, for a while he was my brother's best friend, until my brother realized how big of a douche he was, I think, which was largely because of this thing that came up. My brother heard what happened and like ran in the other room to tell my mom, and because, again, just under a blanket. And the other kids that were there, that guy that was in the same grade as my brother, then there's another one that was a year behind them, and then his little brother, who was the same age as me and my cousin. And honestly, that dude, I love that dude to death. He's like the only dentist I trust. He would have been in that space, I think, unless he wasn't there that day. I don't know. But like, he never contributed to the bullying. But his brother was one of the worst, right? But anytime I looked at his brother, all I saw in him was some kid trying to be cool and prove himself to the kid that's the bully, right? And for the bully, what I saw in him was some kid whose dad didn't want anything to do with him. So it's like, because I saw these aspects of, this people that were 2 of my biggest bullies, rather than being mad at them, I turned it in on myself more. So, it was just like all these different things to contribute to me further hating myself. And, after that whole thing happened when I was 8, my mom's means of dealing with anything was just pour on the guilt and shame. And this is a big thing with how terrible it was, because boys can get you pregnant. It was like, but no information's been given otherwise on anything. So I'm just like, this thing is like terrible, but yet nobody's really explaining anything. And yet I'm being presented with all these things to demonstrate how worthless I am. And, and that was the thing that like just kept going. So it was like, the stuff with the ex that I ended up actually getting into that connection with, it was like, finally had this connection. only because I thought I was going to marry him, and then all hell broke loose, right? And then it didn't happen, and then it contributed to the feeling terrible about myself, and further trying to tear myself apart, right? Just like pick apart everything awful about me, and like that was I spent so much time trying to do that. Like anything that was a problem, right? So okay, my teeth, yeah, that's been an ongoing problem too, and it's always my entire life. When I before I even had my teeth grow in. Okay, you know how they say that as a baby you have all the teeth, you have your adult teeth and all those in there already. But they don't come out till later, right? So when I was born, like I was weeks old, I think, I ran a really high fever, and it apparently like damaged the enamel. So I got the spots. Always, that this is what I got, right? So, yeah. And so most of my elementary years were spent focusing on like how terrible this was, right? So I got hit in the mouth with a baseball that knocked my front teeth out. And then when they started coming in, of course, they came in kind of discolored and spotted. And so I got made fun of a lot for that. There's like one kid in particular that did in 5th grade. But then, because my mom saw it as a problem, then we had to like go through all this effort to like try to get it fixed. So it's like everything in my life was telling me and reminding me nonstop that everything I was wrong. It's like all these things about me that I couldn't even help were bad, right? So shit. Doing the thing again. Okay. Right. So this one has a veneer, and I don't remember if we did that on the bottom ones or not. I don't know, at least the front two had veneers on them. And she knows I'm doing the thing again. This is very sensitive. Anyway, Buttercup, quit. Yeah, so got the veneers to try to cover the spots, right? It didn't work. It just made new spots, because you can still see where that shit's at. This one, when I was an undergrad, broke. Like the entire, like if you divide it this way, like at the side, the front quarter of it fell off. When I was trying to take care of my teeth, I was flossing in undergrad, trying to take care of things, and like the bottom chunk of my tooth just broke off. And I cried because it was something that has been, God, the bane of my existence my entire life. But then when that broke, it was the middle of the week, and I was living in the dorm, and I didn't have my car. It was sophomore year, and I had to wait till later in the week to be able to go get it fixed. I think we got an appointment set up on Monday. I don't know, there was a few days, and I had just the front chunk of it was missing, and like it was kind of dark, like it's dark now, but it was just like my actual tooth was dark at that point, and it was horrible, and I tried not to smile at all that week. And it was like toward the end of school, I want to say, and there was I worked with this one girl who she was in a wheelchair. I was a personal care attendant, and so I'd help her with like bathroom, shower stuff, all that stuff, and got a little bit of a paycheck while I was doing it. But she was like one of my good friends. She's like 8 years older than me or something. And she was living in a dorm not too far away. But we were really tight, and, you know, I had pictures with her, and it's like I'm trying not to smile full on because, you know, I didn't want to draw attention to the tooth. Right now, I don't really care. I mean, it's still, it was not as dark. I don't know what happened, but it's like it's gone. I don't know, like whatever's left of my actual tooth underneath it, because most of this is fake. Like there's just a sliver in there that's my actual tooth. But all at once I noticed a while back that it's like somehow dark. It's like, oh, cool, great. You know, and it's one of those things that, like, to further deter me from using my voice, because I've talked about all the ways that I wasn't allowed to use it, or like I was made to feel really shitty anytime, like my mom with the deal with my cousin, like I wasn't allowed to talk about anything that actually had happened to see if I actually had done anything or not. And, you know, she just made me feel like complete shit about it. And then it's like it was something that was just never supposed to be spoken of, right? And then it's like, the stupid thing was, at some point in time, to make me feel less bad about it, my grandmother told me that there was something along that line for my grandfather when he was about that age that he would never own up to. I mean, he told her, but it's like beyond that, he wouldn't admit to it or anything. And it's like, so basically this thing comes up, and I think that was part of like what triggered the inclination for my grandfather to become my bully, was because he saw in me something that, you know, was similar to something that had happened to him in childhood. And it was two older kids were pushing him to be on top of some girl and like wiggle around and all this stuff. And it was like they were making fun of him and he had no idea what was going on. But because of this thing that had happened, and then this thing that came up with me when I was 8, you know, about the same age, their answer to it was just to, you know, make me feel guilty and just an immense amount of shame about everything, right? So anyway, yeah, but like that was another piece that played in with the me not being able to use my voice, right? So then, like, I could never speak up if anything was okay. Before all that part, you know, there was a time, I wanted to say I was probably 6 or 7, and we were at my aunt's house. It was somebody on my dad's side. I want to say it might have been my youngest uncle and his now wife's first house, or is it, honestly, I don't know that they're not in the same house. I don't know when the last time I've been in their house was. I remember at one point we all had a sleepover, like all the grandkids, at this uncle and aunt's house. So it was like me and my brother, the second sister's 3 daughters, and the fourth in line but second sister. Okay, so like the second child she's the one that had 3 daughters, and then there was another uncle and then another aunt, and that aunt only had 1 daughter. You know, but I remember there was something we all did together, but then I remember there was something, I don't know if it was at their house or the other aunt's house. Anyway, I think it was at the only child's house. At some point, the girls were all upstairs, and of course we were all close to the same age, not exactly. Like, my brother is 2.5 years older than me. The next cousin is like 4 months younger than him. And then the only child, and then the middle daughter of the trio was born in January the same year I was born. So we're all like right there, kind of close. So we used to hang out all the time. When we were little, and everybody get together. Kids are supposed to play together, right? So at one point, all the girls were up in my cousin's room, and my cousin, the only child, didn't want to play the same thing the rest of us wanted to play. And I stood up for the group. And to use me as an example of what would happen if anybody went against what she wanted, she slapped me, right? So that was like one of those early times of when I was really, really, truly discouraged from using my voice, and then there was a whole issue with, the siblings, my dad and his sister, that girl's mom, it was more my mom and the sister had a issue, but like at some point my brother said he tried to stand up for me at something with this cousin too, and her mom got after him, even though cousin had been in the wrong. He was trying to defend me, and he got in trouble too. So it's like that was the kind of shit that we were getting, like from the extended family even. So, right. But anyway, back to the teeth thing. So, that was all the stuff with not using the voice. There's the discouragement on that end, right? So, yeah, they're not great. Anyway, last year, and okay, we're pushing my birthday real hard. So last year, it was like the day before my birthday, I think, that this one broke. Hold on. Okay, so she saw the neighbor's kid playing in the sprinkler, and she was wanting to go yell at him. She did potty, however, so there's that. Anyway, yeah, so last year, I'm doing the YouTube thing. And of course, I started it in November 2023. I took a break and then had to come back to it. And I started back in March. So July, I still was not feeling really sturdy about what I was doing on it or anything, like real confident of anything. And then my tooth breaks. And old me, that would have been enough to stop the thing, right? Because like anytime anything went wrong, then I saw that as a more support of the fact that I was doing something I wasn't supposed to be doing. Even though in this case, I knew very much I was supposed to be doing the thing, but because my entire life, every time something got hard, I had a whole lot of quit. So yeah, I cried through a video last year, either on my birthday or the day before, I think, because my tooth broke. And I was like, great, now what? And honestly, it's obviously a funky color. I don't like that. But I've been thinking a lot about it. It's like even that serves a purpose. And like, I think the bigger part is like this whole thing has been trying to be comfortable with who I am, and regardless of all the things that I've been, that have been actively demonstrated are flaws and, a problem with me along the way. It's like, it's like the teeth, the coloring, that's the whole thing. Like can't help that. I couldn't help that when I was little and my teeth came in with spots because I ran this really high temperature when I was a baby and it damaged the enamel somehow. Right? I in no way had any control over those details. But then, we had to go through, like, there were all these appointments trying to fix everything, right? Yeah. Okay, so the guy that I went to school with, that was my same age, or roughly, actually, I think he's like 3 weeks younger than me, but we're in the same class, so, hey, that makes me feel a little better. I was one of the oldest in our class because, July birth date. And then, you can go with 1 year and be the younger one, or you can go the next year and be the older one. And yeah. Anyway, so I was one of the older ones, but, then that guy was right close to it. Anyway, that's irrelevant. I always liked that kid. And, we both went to Ball State, graduated the same year, but he went for dentistry and I went for the hell of it. Because my mom made me, basically. So I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. So it had been her life regret that she hadn't gone to college after high school. So I had to go to college. It's like, I don't even know who I am or what I want to do. But here I am trying to, go psychology and try to figure it out, right? Anyway, yeah. So I went like 10 years without going to the dentist. There's some time in the time frame, or past. No, I think basically after I came off of my parents' insurance, whenever that happens, like 26 or whatever, it's like once I hit that point, then I just didn't want any part of going. When I finally did go, it'd been 10 years. I think I came off of their insurance a little earlier than that because I got the job at the group home and it had a decent dental plan on it, but then I didn't ever want to use it. But anyway, it was like 10 years between me going to the dentist because I loathed the dentist. And then, the guy I went to school with becomes a dentist and, he practices like 15 minutes from where we live. So it's like, all right, I'll go. And I think I had something of concern. Like anytime in my life I have had a tooth that gets remotely sore, then it's like I go into hyperdrive on flossing and brushing extra and making sure, to take care of it and get it in a better spot. And then, usually when it stops hurting, I mean, that was how it was for that. Like I set up the appointment, but then I was doing that all the time because there had been a pain. But then when I went to see him for the first time, he said for somebody in their mid-30s, for somebody who hasn't been to the dentist in 10 years, your teeth look really good. But also for somebody in their mid-30s, you've had a lot of work done. Right? So it's like, how much of what I had to go through when I was younger was even necessary for that matter. Like that tooth right there, it had a cap on it and the cap came off Christmas Eve, 2023, I think. And I put it back on and it stayed there for about a month and then it came off when I was eating something and I just never put it back. And that cap has been there for years, keeping me from doing anything with what was left of the tooth. So it looks kind of funky on that end. But that tooth still feels pretty solid for the fact that it's been uncovered and still usable in the past year and a half. It's like, how much of what I needed was really, truly needed? That's been something I've been kind of going around and around with for a while too. It's like, I had a lot of work done when I was little. And I hated the dentist because when I was in 8th grade, because I was going all the time, but when I was in 8th grade, my mom took me out of school for a 10:30 dentist appointment. And would go in there and, they get me prepped to get the cap or whatever. They numb me up and then the dentist disappears and I think he forgot all about me. He did not come back until the numbness was wearing off. And when he started, I felt everything. And, of course he says, if you feel it, let me know. It's like, what are you going to do? Give me another shot to numb me up and then disappear and never come back again? So it's like, I just sat there and felt it. And hated every minute of it, forced myself to sit through it, and just kind of hated the dentist. I think that one particularly was not a very good dentist, but it's where we went for most of my shit. But I'm of the mindset here lately, like, it is what it is. I spent my entire life feeling like it was a problem, and it was like this big awful thing, and I should be like embarrassed about it and all this stuff. And it's like, you know what? Really, at the end of the day, it's not that big of a deal, right? So, okay, so I got a broken tooth. Yeah, it doesn't look good, but it's still usable, and I kind of feel like, okay, if something happens to the front teeth, I will definitely get it fixed. But I kind of feel like with some of them, I don't know that I will, because I feel like it's taken me so long to be okay with who I am and realize that this has nothing to do with my worthiness as a human, but at the same time, it was something that was used very much to diminish me and, my sense of self over and over again my entire life. So it's just like, now that I've kind of just accepted this is, in one way or another, my teeth aren't going to be glorious, but first, it could always be worse. But also, yeah, it could be better too. But, since most of a chunk of my identity has been, not using my voice because I didn't want to get made fun of for my teeth even, that was a part of it. That was not, I've talked about the other ways that I have been dissuaded from using my voice along the way, getting made fun of for, when I was like, 5 or 6 and called my best friend, and her mom answers the phone, and I was all excited because it was the first time I was calling anybody, and it was the big deal, right? But it's the house lines. So it doesn't go straight to the friend, it goes to whoever in their house answers it. And she was like one of like 6 kids, I think, and one of the younger ones, and her mom answered the phone. I was like, ooh, who's this? And I said my name, and she says, oh, I thought you were Rachel's boyfriend. It's like, so I don't sound like I'm supposed to either? It's like, for fuck's sake, everything's wrong with everything I'm doing, right? And like everything that I'm trying to, hey, knock it off, hound. Yeah, it's like all these things to discourage me in like all the ways possible. And honestly, I feel like at this point, that's going to serve a whole lot of purpose too. Like, I feel like all the shitty things that I've gone through, the universe is going to make up for them. And there's a reason that they've all been necessary for the journey too. Like, there's been a lot of hard stuff that I've had to navigate through on this whole space. And, a lot of it has been undoing the past programming around the aversion of using my voice because of all the ways that my voice or my teeth or whatever were getting me made fun of or whatever else. She's petting my arm. But yeah, like at this point, I feel like it's taken me so long to be okay with who I am, regardless of the physical imperfections. I was like, what the fuck does that even matter? So, I mean, I don't know. Okay. I'm pretty sure that might be the only dentist I ever go to again because I have so little trust in dentists, period. But I do trust him, and it's, because I've known him at least since I was 8. His dad was my art teacher in elementary school. Or was it middle school? I think it was middle school, actually. But we had a bunch of classes together. My mom babysat him and his brother. His brother was an asshole. He wasn't. So, yeah. And even that's kind of funny, like how things come back around. Because, After I moved home and was in process of getting the divorce, my mom found some like little kids books on Facebook Marketplace that she wanted, and his wife was selling the older brother's wife was selling the books that her daughter had outgrown, and my mom wanted to get them for my niece. So I went with her to pick them up, and Douche Dude was there. And it was the same exact thing that he always used to do, looking at me like he knew something about me. And it's like, just that look, it's like, that's all you got? It's like I'm fucking 35 and that's all we got now? Well, I might have been 36 at that point. No, I think it was before my birthday, because I think it was real quick after I left my ex. Tyler died 10 days after I turned 35. So then August, I went back to Alabama, and because I cleared space because of the deal with Tyler, I was able to be in a better mindset to start seeing what really wasn't working with the ex. So yeah, I was 35 when I left. So I'm pretty sure that, I mean, I was home from mid-March to July, so so I had plenty of time in there to still be 35, so I'm pretty sure that's when it was. But yeah, like even the other guy, the guy that was in the same grade as my brother, at his mom's funeral when I was 30. You know, and I know that one because it was right after I got married, and my ex was astounded at the fact that so many people went to his mom's funeral. And my ex was like, I don't think I even know this many people, let alone have this many people that like me. It's like, yeah, you're not likable. She was. Everybody loved his mom. She was like a really awesome human. She was one of the good Christian types that's not just, Bible thumping everybody over the head. She's actually makes them feel the positive parts of the belief system. Yeah, she was one of those. So every time I do mention somebody on that end, she's usually up there in the top that I would refer to about, yes, everybody should be able to have their belief system. But at the same time, not everybody that falls into that group, they're definitely, some actually try to live the Christ-like bit, and some of them are just trying to destroy others in his name because it somehow makes them feel better, which I think that's a big part of like the whole thing, right? It's like even my life has been all the ways everybody else has been trying to tear me apart to keep me from stepping into what I'm here to be or do in the world, but it's like all out of fear. It's like because they have these things that they feel shitty about, they somehow make themselves feel better about bullying people that they deem in some way less strong or less capable or whatever they want to use on that end. So yeah, well, joke's on them, because I know every bit of everything I've been through has made me a lot stronger, and I keep seeing like the things that I'm starting to see, like, okay, I've had a lot of things along the way that have pushed me to know that I'm meant for more than my life has allowed me to have access to, so it's like kind of that glass ceiling. It's like I see all these things that I'm meant to have in my existence, but for some reason I cannot get there, right? But this has been a big part of the process of making me ready to be able to get there, for one thing. But yeah, it's like transmuting the density that I've been collecting and all the things that I've been collecting along the way, whether, it was actually something that I did or said, or just the way somebody wanted me to feel less than because it sounded naive or whatever else. And, sounded what didn't sound like I was supposed to sound, or whatever the fuck else. I don't know. Anyway, on that note, I'm going to wrap this up and go see about going home and hopefully getting this mess handled today. Because these roots are intense. The fun thing is, the more that I see of my roots, the more I'm starting to see how gray it's coming in. I don't think it's really bad right there, but every now and then it's like, ooh, okay. Which I know the women in my family go gray early. Tend to. My one cousin that has really long hair, it's like she's got a bunch. You can definitely see it. I was 16, I think. No. Would have been, I think I was 17 getting ready for prom. Yes, getting ready for junior prom. And the girl was like, oh my God, you have some gray hair. And she like starts pulling it out. It's like, it's not necessary to pull it out. Doesn't that make more show up? But I've dyed my hair since I was like 22. It's a long time. The closest it's been to regular colored in that time was when I went to basic training, and I couldn't do it whatever I wanted, so I had to dye it as close to the root color as possible. So then as it was growing out, it wasn't obvious. Usually I went with, like, in those days, it was more like, it was browns with red tones was the big one. But yeah, since my hair is not naturally any kind of red, I had to dye it as close to my roots as possible, and it worked out. However, as soon as, I went back to kind of reddish tones after I was out of the basic and AIT, but, there were those people that would want to harass me because that wasn't my natural hair color. It's like, so what? It's still a natural-ish hair color. So you're going to fucking deal with it because I'm going to do this route. And for 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks in the summer, you're going to fucking deal with it. So, yeah. Anyway, on that note, as always, I appreciate you. Until next time, see ya.